Good evening, one and all. Welcome to this 13th Indo-Christian Dialogue for Fellowship on the theme Sages and Saints for Self-Realization and Social Transformation. This evening, we are happy to have Professor Ramnath Narayanswamy to speak to us on Maharshi Ramana Maharshi, and the session will be moderated by Father Gabriel Lobo. Before I hand over the time to Father Gabriel, I just would like to introduce him to you. Father Gabriel Lobo, after completion of graduation, before he joined seminary, he was working as a manager in a plywood industries and carpenter institution. And then he got an ordination. And then after that, he did B.Ed for differently able children. Then he did master degree in counseling. He was superior, formator, parish priest, and manager of the school. He preached mission in English, Konkani, Kannada, and Hindi. Father Gabriel Lobo is presently the Regional Secretary of Ecumenism and Interfaith Dialogue, Catholic Bishops' Conference of Karnataka. So we are happy to have you, Father, to moderate this session. I now hand over the time to Father Gabriel Lobo to introduce this evening's speaker and moderate the sessions. Over to you, Father.
Good evening. Thank you, Manlun, for your encouraging words introducing me. Dear fathers, Reverend Father Chandragunal, fathers, brothers, sisters, friends, with a great joy, I would like to introduce our Honorable Professor Ramnath Narayanswamy on the topic of today, Sages and Saints of India, Sri Ramana Maharshi. We are privileged and blessed today, a richly talented professor before us. Ramnath Narayanswamy, the professor in the economics and social sciences area in the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, for the past 30 years. He currently holds the position of Distinguished Professor in the Foundation for the Liberal Arts and Management Education, otherwise known as Flame University in Pune. After securing a first class first in political science from the University of Pune, he shifted to political economy and area studies, combining economics, political science, and sociology. He secured his doctorate from the School for Advanced Studies in Social Sciences in Paris. He taught at the Center for the Management of the Socialist Economies in the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics in Pune. He was visiting research fellow in the Center for Russian and East European Studies of the University of Birmingham, supported by the Rockefeller Foundation, and was reader in the Center of Eastern Studies of the University of Bombay. He was also invited by the German Foreign Ministry to do a study on the Indian response to perestroika in 1985 to 1990, supported by a grant from the Volkswagen Foundation at the Federal Institute of East European Studies in Cologne. He was visiting professor in the Maison des Sciences des Hommes in Paris, the Federal Institute of East European and International Studies in Cologne, McGill University in Canada, the Management School, Lancaster, and HEC, Montreal. He also held a visiting professorship at Nijrode University in Netherlands and the School of Business, Economics, and Law of the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. Fluent in several languages, a frequent contributor to professional journals in India and abroad, Dr. Ramnath has published extensively in his domain. He has been the recipient of several scholarships and fellowships. He is the author of Gorbachev, Economic Reform in Eastern Europe, Himalaya Publishing House, Bombay, 1988. The Soviet Economic System, 1989, translated from the French. The Global Mission of Sadhguru Sri Sharavana Baba, Bangalore in 2010, and Living from the Inside, a 3-volume work published by Arida Books, Bangalore, 2013 to 2015. His latest book on consciousness and management was released in August 2019 and was followed by another edited volume on consciousness in management with Elizabeth Denley. He's also completing a volume on management insights from Indian spirituality, investigations from the epics of managers. He has won several teaching awards from successive batches of students in both creativity and innovation. He was one among 4 instructors selected from all over the world by BAZ, the Journal of the American Association for the Advancement of Collegiate Schools in Business, who have significantly contributed to innovation in management education. Current interests include creativity and innovation, spirituality and leadership. He authors a bi-monthly column on spiritual matters for the Deccan Herald. He is a part of the editorial board of the Journal of Management, Spirituality and Religion, Edinburgh, the International Journal on the Vedic Foundations of Indian Management, New Delhi, the International Journal on Spirituality and Organizational Leadership, New Delhi, and the International Journal of Complexity and Leadership in Management, UK. My dear friends, such a wonderful professor, a wise and a gracious person is before us. I welcome our dear Honorable Professor Ramnath Narayanswamy. We are eager to listen to you today, enriched by you, by your wisdom, by your experience, such a vast experience on a great holy person, Sri Ramana Maharshi, a living embodiment of all the 4 important paths to liberation in Sanatana Dharma. Welcome, dear Professor Ramnath Narayanswamy. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Father, for your kind introduction, for those kind words. I'm not sure I deserve them. Let me begin right away and address the purpose for which we are assembled here this evening. It is indeed for me a privilege, a pleasure and an honor to address such a distinguished audience. Sri Ramana is very close to my heart. It's a relationship that began more than 2 decades ago. And in some respects, Father Matthew was knowledgeable about this intimate relationship that I had developed. It enveloped me sometime in 1999 when I was traveling to New York. And that year I was put up in a residence of a close friend of mine in New York City in Madison. And he was an investment banker. He just happened to be. So when he left for work, I was left alone in this flat. And there were very few books around. So I went around to check out the bookshelf. And I found a volume by Dilip Kumar Roy, who was a devotee of Sri Aurobindo. And I read his biography. It was a gripping account. And it just so happened that somewhere in the middle of that book, he writes about his trip to Tiruvannamalai, where he visits Sri Ramana in the 1920s. That was the first time I saw a photograph of Sri Ramana Maharshi. My earliest memories of Sri Ramana came from my father. When we were children, like many Indian parents in this part of the world, he used to feed us with stories from the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Panchatantra, and his own experiences. My father was a gold medalist from the Madras Presidency. And in the last years of Ramana's life, when he was critically ill, he and his English professor, A. Subramanian, they had made a resolve to visit Ramanashram to seek the sage's blessings. But somehow, unfortunately, he told me much later, in later years, that trip never materialized. And as we all know, Sri Ramana passed away on April 14th, 1950, in the evening at 8:40 p.m. But my father did tell us a number of stories, gripping stories when we were children. It doesn't matter to me very much whether you believe me or not, but we were about 7 years old, 8 years old, something like that. And during this trip to New York, many decades later, suddenly all those stories started coming alive just when I saw the Maharishi's photograph. The eyes captivated me, and I think I fell in love. I made a mental resolve on that time. It was a kind of a sankalpa, if you will, that I should read every little word that anybody anywhere in the world had written about Sri Ramana. Such was the passion that gripped me. And I think in subsequent years, I more or less fulfilled that resolve. I think Bhagavan helped me to complete that resolve. I first visited Ramanashram in 1999. I remember I had a neighbor who was a Ramana devotee, and I once asked him, "Can you give me something to read on Ramana? I've only heard of him. My father has spoken about him." My father spoke about his experience of Samadhi on the holy hill of Arunachala and used to refer to him as the silent sage of Arunachala. But beyond that, I had very little knowledge. My neighbor gave me Paul Brunton's magnificent work, A Search in Secret India. And I remember that afternoon, I rarely read books from A to Z in one sitting. I do that only if the book is gripping. And this gripped me by the heart. I started at 2 o'clock and I finished at about 6:30. And very often I was sweating. And I'm just thinking and reflecting at that time, the afternoon that I spent. My wife got a little worried. She said, "Why is it that you are in tears?" I said, "I'll explain it to you once I finish the book." And the reason I was in tears was in 1999. I mean, I think crisis is not new to human beings. We all go through difficult times, challenging times. Very often we commit mistakes which we are not aware of. We realize them only later. We are able to connect the dots only later. And if we are sensitive, we make amends and we try to change the path that we were on. I was in some kind of a journey like that in 1999. I will save you the details because they don't really concern us here. What is important to note is that I was desperately searching a wave of inner fulfillment, which I was not aware of what it was at that time. But there was this nagging hunger, this thirst, which was rather intense, and I couldn't quite control it. This is how it all actually began. I have a Christian friend in Bangalore. His name is Gerard. And like most Christians, he recommended the Bible. So I took that seriously. And I must have read the New Testament and the Old Testament about 200 times. And I understand it as well as any other Christian brother or sister of mine. And to be honest with you, the life of Christ moves me, again, to tears. There are some incidents, some parables in the Bible that move me very strongly, such as Christ and Mary Magdalene, Christ and the children, Christ and the prostitute. These are very moving parables because the insights that the Lord gives in these parables are without parallel. They are of incomparable beauty. And despite the fact that I devoured the Bible, I read it from A to Z many times, as I said, almost 200 times. I can speak about it with some degree of authority. I still didn't get the message. I thought that there was a deeper message. Yes, I understood the message of love and the message of forgiveness. I think if you were to summarize the Lord's teachings in the New Testament, it would take you 2 words: unconditional love, unconditional forgiveness, which are great teachings, no doubt about that. But somehow that didn't satisfy me. They were beautiful, they were heartrending, they were insightful, they were all those things. But somehow, don't ask me why, I felt that there was something deeper and I was missing that. And I was very hungry to get an answer, to search for it. What was it? Why do I feel that there is a piece of this puzzle that is missing? And when I read Paul Brunton's work, A Search in Secret India, I had an answer to my question. In one of the chapters, in the later chapters, a devotee asks Sri Ramana, what is the significance of the crucifixion of Christ? And Ramana was not a sage who answered questions quickly. Very rarely did he respond quickly. He would often take his time, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, sometimes half an hour, and then turn to the questioner and say something in reply, which was usually very brilliant, very insightful, and which would address the heart of the matter. He turned to this devotee and he said 3 sentences. And that was the time that I started sweating. It was as if a stroke of lightning had hit me. And the sentences were as follows. He said the cross represents the human body. Second, Jesus represents I am the body idea. And his crucifixion represents his merging with the infinite. I don't know what happened to me at that time. I had read enough of Vedanta, especially Advaita, to know that this was pure Advaita. And there was at once this tremendous sense of relief in my heart that, this is the message of the Lord. And I never turned back since. So what I would like to begin with this humble thought to all of you this evening, assembled here, to this August gathering, that it was through Hindu masters that I understood the beauty of Christ. The second master who taught me the inner significance of Christ was, of course, Swami Yogananda Paramahansa, in his classic work on the autobiography of a yogi. It's a stunning work, which I perused after this. And the third was, of course, his Guru Sri Yukteswar, who was instructed by Mahavatar Babaji to write this wonderful text on the Gita and tell the world the similarities between the message of Jesus and the message of Sanatana Dharma. It's again a magnificent work, which I picked up on a trip to Ranchi when I went to visit the yoga school that he had established way back in the 1920s. It was a memorable visit. With these words by way of background, let me begin and get to the heart of what I would like to communicate this evening to you. I'm reminded of a beautiful saying by Swami Vivekananda. I read that many, many years ago. And when I read that, it is permanently etched in my memory, because such is its beauty and such is its power. He said, it's a great blessing to be born into a religion. And then he added, but it's a great curse to die in one. I sat up straight. It is such a stunning statement. It is so deeply insightful. I reflected upon it for a long time. And let me share what I understand of that statement. And what I think the revered Swami meant was that while it's a great religion, a great blessing to be born into a religion, if religion has not taught you, if that religion under which you were born has not taught you the importance of being spiritual, has not elevated you to becoming spiritual, has not helped you to transcend differences, to see only one, because he is only one. He has many forms, but he's only one. His essence is only one. If that religion has not taught you that, then that religion has been pretty much a waste of time on you. That is how I appropriated it. And I marveled at the depth and intensity of that insight. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start this evening's lecture with this thought that if all the Sanskriti, the spiritual inheritance of India, can be summarized, our scriptures, our smritis, our shrutis, our epics, the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, the Saddarshanas, the Itihasas, if we are able to summarize the essence of this body of knowledge, vast, critical, precious, valuable knowledge, in one word, the word that comes to me is transcend. And I think that is the most powerful teaching of Sanatana Dharma in this time and age. That is why it is called the eternal religion. The late Sri Sathya Sai Baba described the Abrahamic traditions in Sanatana Dharma in terms of grandfather, father, son, and grandson. And there was some truth in that, certainly. The meaning of this profound statement is that everything that we are brought up in this world, everything that has been given to us, house, wife, children, material possessions, job, responsibilities, duties, what have you, indeed life, indeed death, the purpose of everything that has been given to you in this world is to transcend it. And the scriptures prepare you for that journey. Religion, if understood in the best sense of that term, is to help you in this journey of transcendence. There must come a time in your life when you are able to transcend each of the things, transcend the attachment to each of the things that you develop in this journey of life, till you come to him. And you come to him on bended knees and tell him, now, my Lord, I want only you. Only you can satisfy my thirst. Only you can satisfy my hunger. I want nothing else. I desire nothing. There's a beautiful story about the late Sathya Sai Baba. A lady goes up to him and says, I want moksha. Give me moksha, give me salvation. Release me. And he said, all you need to do is give up the first two words, I Want. Give up the personal pronoun I, and give up want, which is desire. What is left is liberation. Again, like most stories, it's a beautiful story. So to come back to what I was saying, the essence of Hindu Dharma to me is transcendence. And that is how I started my spiritual journey in 1999 with a visit to Sri Ramana Ashram. I started getting involved in a serious way into the ashram, its activities, but more importantly, the teachings of Ramana in December 1999. I went through every work that the ashram had, went through its teachings, delved deeply into it. And I found myself experiencing a certain degree of equanimity, peace, calmness, happiness, if you will, that I never thought I would be able to acquire in this life. I never thought that I would be capable of achieving that degree of equanimity that came to me in the early years of my sadhana in the Ramana way. The deeper I read, the more I read, and the more I delved, the more intense the attachment, the more intense the attachment to its teachings. My first visit was in 1999 to the ashram. I took my family with me, and we did the Girivalam of 14 kilometers. It was rather hot. Tiruvannamala is an Agni Kshetra. It's a Kshetra of fire. It's a Shivalinga of fire, representing fire. And I remember doing those 14 kilometers. It took us about 3.5 hours. Came back exhausted, but somehow strangely refreshed and elevated. Ramana once described Arunachala as fire, and he was right. He said Arunachala is like fire. If you come near it, you cannot remain unaffected by it. This hill will keep pulling you back, time and again. And its only function is to give you solace. Kailash is where Shiva is supposed to stay, that is its residence. But Arunachala, he said, is Shiva himself. I've never forgotten those words. And as I trudged the hill many times, I must have done the Girivalam about 200 times. I've done it in the day, I've done it in the night, I've done it on all weekdays, I've done it in heat, cold, rain, afternoons, mornings, evenings, early morning. Name it and I have done it. I was also deeply reminded of Ramana's famous saying, there's not a patch of this hill which my feet have not touched. Who was Ramana and what was Ramana? He was one of the most celebrated sages of the last century, one of the greatest that India has had. He espoused the path of jnana and also, at the same breath, emphasized the importance of bhakti. He used to describe bhakti as the mother of jnana. There's a story that goes about a young boy, a youth in his early 20s, who came to the ashram one day and asked him, I have read Spinoza, I have read Hegel, I have read this, I have read this philosopher, that philosopher. What should I do now? It was a genuine question. The boy was not showing off. And Ramana's answer was equally genuine, though many people didn't understand it. The subtle language of Samadhi in which he spoke, which all saints speak, is not easy to comprehend. It was there too in the Christian tradition. The early Christian mystics, Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint Catherine, if you read their writings and their outpourings, they're very similar to our saints. It is the same message of oneness, the indivisible whole. So Ramana looked at this young boy and he said, go back the way you came. And for a minute, the boy was nonplussed. He thought the sage had insulted him. He thought the sage had asked him to go back from the door in which he had entered. A few devotees went up to the boy and comforted him and said, that is not what the sage meant. What the sage meant, he gave you the very highest of wisdom, the counsel which is very, very sophisticated, and ponder and reflect upon it. You came from perfection. Go back to the state of perfection from where you came. Realize that perfection. That was the meaning. It was indeed very profound. There are any number of stories that I can regale you with about Sri Ramana. But that is not my intention here. My intention this evening was, what was unique about him was his initiation, his method of initiation. In our traditions, hallowed traditions, you can be initiated into spiritual life through four ways, four predominant ways, either by touch or by speech. And the highest is the fourth, of course, or by sight, and the fourth is silence. The story goes that the 5 sons of Brahma once came to Lord Dakshinamurti, the young form of Lord Shiva, for self-realization. And the young Dakshinamurti asked them to sit down. And without saying a word, they were in silence. And they received self-realization through silence. That was the unique path that Sri Ramana recommended. To be silent is to silence the chatter of the mind. He described the mind as nothing but a bundle of memory. And therefore, Samadhi is nothing but deliberate, conscious, committing deliberate, conscious suicide of the mind. There is a famous picture that many Indians have in their house of Sri Krishna in the chariot with Arjuna and the 5 horses. It's a very beautiful photograph and a very beautiful painting because it has deep symbolic significance. The 5 horses are the 5 senses. The reins used by the Lord is buddhi, or the intellect. So the message is, use the intellect to rein in your senses, bring them under control. The deeper message there is, if you're able to rein in the animal instincts of your mind, then the mind becomes a friend. But if you're not able to rein in and control the mind, then the mind becomes your enemy. The 5 horses are the 5 senses. The Lord is the charioteer. There is a deep message there too. Krishna is happy to become your charioteer if only you call him. He will come running. He will not say that this role of a charioteer is too low for me. The Lord will come running. So he represents, Arjuna is the individual Atma and Krishna, the Paramatma. And the point of life is, of course, the merger between the Atman and the Paramatman. It's a very beautiful, powerful instruction contained in that painting. The teachings of Ramana are to be understood in this light. They take the seeker right to the highest level of wisdom, what he called self-inquiry. He would often ask his devotees to ponder and reflect on this question, Nana Yare, who am I? And answer this question for themselves, which actually inaugurates, in many senses, the spiritual journey. His method of instruction would lead to self-revelation, to an understanding of our real identity, or what it is that constitutes our real identity. This was Sri Ramana's unique greatness. When he came all the way from Madurai as a young boy, he was just 17 years of age. He discarded everything, took a train. It was the Lord who directed him to Tiruvannamala. He had no money. He took a few rupees that were there in his house. It was just enough to cover his train fare to Tiruvannamala. He comes, discards his clothes, throws the little money that he had. And with absolutely nothing, he was stark naked. But a couple of children started throwing stones at him because they didn't understand who he was. Instead of troubling them, he went into the Arunachaleshwara temple, in the Patala Linga of the temple, which at that time was infested with mice, with rodents, dirt, scorpions. And he spent 1 year there in Samadhi, in silence. He used to in later years recall that the only luxury he had at that time was at midday, a priest would come and give him some rice and milk. And he said, my father, Lord Shiva, would allow me this delicious porridge at midday. And that was the only food I had. And he said, those were the happiest days of my life. I was undisturbed and I could remain in the self. What was unique about him was he achieved self-realization at a very tender age, young age. And it came to him in a flash. There was no drama. There was no theater. It just happened, merely happened. And once it happened, there was a steady immersion in the self. He said, despite thoughts, despite my actions, despite my utterances, my absorption in the Supreme Self remained unabated. It was continuous. In later years, he was to say that jnana needs time for itself, needs time to assert itself, to steady itself. But in his case, it came in a flash. He had Christian devotees, he had Muslim devotees. Christian fathers, padris would often come to him and say, why don't you resolve the war in Korea? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Why don't you do this? They would plague him with questions. The same thing with people of other faiths, including Hindus. And the answer each time was the same. First, inquire who you are. Understand who you are. Later, devotees would tease him and say, this answer that you give of who am I, you use it like a brahmastram. And he would say, it is a brahmastram because it is the aircraft route to God, to realization, to divinity, to consciousness. He never left the hill of Arunachala after he came when he was just 17 years old. He spent the next 54 years of his life on the hill, on that holy hill, which today has been revered for centuries. I've seen ethnographic paintings of the 5th century, 6th century of people circumambulating that holy hill, even at that time. And later he made a statement saying, there's not a patch of this hill which my feet have not touched. It's a gripping account. And I think that there is much to be learned. More than reading our scriptures, any scriptures of any faith, I think it is invaluable what you get by reading the lives of saints and masters. The life of Ramakrishna Paramahansa, for example. When you read that life, when you read daily life of the Paramahansa, what you get by way of insights cannot be matched by any scripture because it is real testimony. It is lived experience. And that goes directly into our hearts. not into our heads, because this you can't trust, but the heart you can trust, and it absorbs it immediately. There was a great statement that Ramana made. People would ask him, do you recommend Christianity? Do you recommend Jesus' message? Do you recommend the message of the Prophet Muhammad? Which path is the best? And he would say without guile, in deep humility, he would say, I commend all paths because they all reach the same goal. His way was inclusive, not exclusive. His way was to unite people together in the common journey of self-revelation, self-awakening, self-realization. There was no compromise in his teachings. When a devotee came to him, he would go directly to the highest level and not compromise, not let him wander in any other direction, but the path straight to self-awakening. He would often say, first understand who you are. Forget about God, forget about this, forget about that. First know who you are. And this is very much in teaching, very much in harmony with Christian teaching too. Know thyself. Understand first who you are. There is, however, a difference which I have discovered between the priest and the mystic. The priest doesn't always get it, because the priest is a prisoner of scripture in any tradition, not just the Hindu tradition, but all traditions. But the mystic transcends all traditions. Nothing binds the mystic. When you read Saint Teresa of Avila or Saint Catherine, or any of our realized masters like Ramakrishna Paramahansa, Vivekananda, Shirdi Baba, Satya Sai Baba, and so on. Mata Amritanandmayi, my own guru, Sadguru Sri Sharvana Baba, who was born self-realized. They display an awesome majesty about themselves. There is an aura which cannot escape your eyes. They have a certain presence which is very powerful. It cannot but move you. And that is what Sri Ramana meant when he said, Arunachala is like fire. You cannot remain unaffected by it. When you come near fire, you have to be affected by it. You have to either run away from it or protect yourself from its heat. In this case, this is the heat of jnana, of wisdom. Gandhi was a great fan of Sri Ramana, and he made 2 visits to Ramanashram. The first visit, he passed the gates of Ramanashram, but did not enter. And there is a lovely story behind that. And the story goes that Rajaji, who was accompanying him, prevented him from coming inside the ashram, because Gandhi was a great admirer of Ramana. He would tell many of his followers, go to Ramanashram, stay there, learn from the Maharishi. So a lot of devotees in Ramanashram were very disappointed that Gandhi didn't enter the ashram. And after some time, a couple of hours had elapsed, Sri Ramana told them that perhaps Rajaji thought that had Gandhi entered the ashram, had he allowed him to enter the ashram, India would not have got its independence, because Gandhi would not have come out of that ashram. So Rajaji had that fear that the Mahatma would refuse to come out and stay in the ashram forever. These are beautiful stories. They cannot but move our hearts and minds when we hear them. The sage of Arunachala was known for his simplicity. He was known for his abhorrence of waste of any kind. Even a grain of mustard, if it fell in the kitchen, he would pick it up and use it, wash it, clean it, use it. He would say, I'm very strict about these matters. In the dining hall, he would eat only what other devotees had access to. He would not tolerate any extra spoonfuls of any kind of food. He practiced what he preached. His compassion knew no bounds. And there is so much that one can learn. He spoke very little. And he wrote very little, though he did inspire a number of people to write texts, beautiful texts, which even today inspire followers to know more, deeply inquire into his teachings. He was a man of Herculean intellect, and yet very childlike, like most saints. Childlike innocence, seeing the world with a degree of wonder, and showing a path to people who came to him, showing a way in which your life can be made a life of heaven on earth, if only you are able to control your mind, tame it, and bend it to go inside and conquer the inside. I think he was one of the tallest sages of modern India. There is nobody quite like him. And even today, when you visit Ramana, the two caves on the hill that he stayed, one, I think, if I'm not mistaken, memory serves me right, was for about 12 years, and another of somewhat similar duration, higher up the hill. He lived entirely within the precincts of the hill, never for a moment abandoning the holy hill, which he saw as Lord Shiva himself. He inspired a few texts. Some devotees once went to him and said, can you choose the best slokas, the best 43, 44 slokas of the Gita and put it together? And he did that. And you can buy that at Ramana. The literature there on his teachings is priceless. I first went to Ramana in 1999, and I was so gripped by the atmosphere, the ambience. You can feel the sage's presence. He was once asked before his Samadhi, and he said, where will I go? Where can I go after I leave my mortal coil? I will very much be here. And when you go there, you can feel that powerful presence. You can actually feel it. Every minute, every second that you are present in that holy ashram. It is today developed into a beautiful complex. It is very liberal. The only thing that the ashram is strict about are its timings, or its food timings, its lunch, breakfast, and dinner. Otherwise, you're pretty much left to be on your own. And it takes some time, maybe a day, maybe 2 days, for you to get into harmony with the presence that you feel in that wonderful place. I visited it for the first time in 1999, and 2 years later, I was gripped by a desire to leave my mortal coil in the holy hill, within the premises of Arunachala. There is a famous statement in the Skanda Purana where Lord Shiva says, anybody who stays within 30 miles of the holy hill of Arunachala is assured of liberation, even without initiation. There are interesting anecdotes in Sri Ramana's lifetime where this particular evocation in the Skanda Purana is discussed by him with his devotees. When I read that, there was this sudden desire in, I think, 2000, 2001, to buy a piece of land in Arunachala, which could be my refuge for me, my family, fellow devotees, to come there whenever we wanted to experience that peace. After a couple of years, despite the fact that land rates in those days was not the rates that you see today, that was still a lot of money for me. And somehow, with the grace of Bhagavan, I was able to muster up those resources and purchase a ground over there. And a few years later, build a house there, which still serves as my refuge to this day. Again, thanks to the grace of Sri Ramana, my Guru, Lord Shiva, I was able to build that place. And I have access to going there whenever I can, and which I do very often. Let me close with the thought that I'd be very happy to answer any questions, clarifications that you might have. But before I do that, let me close with this thought. There was a Muslim devotee who was, I think, if I remember right, he was a professor somewhere in Aligarh in the north. And he would come every year with his wife and spend some time with Ramana. He was deeply attached to Ramana. Any Ramana devotee will tell you about him and his wife. And on one such occasion, his wife felt a deep desire, experienced a deep desire to feed Ramana. And she would pray to him incessantly, saying that, please accept my invitation. I want you to come to our house. I want you to have a meal with me, which the sage was not used to. He had never done that to any devotee. And seeing her intense desire, her intense prayer, one day when they went to him, he turned to her and he said, I'm not in the habit of coming to people's houses, but I do appreciate your desire to feed me. So what I suggest is, why don't you call 4 people in my name and feed them with the feeling that you are feeding me, and I will eat through them, and my hunger will be assuaged. It was such a beautiful thought. The lady was ecstatic. And in a couple of days, she did exactly what the sage had recommended. She called 4 Brahmins to her house, made a sumptuous meal, which probably would be the envy of any Brahmin wife, fed them, and when they returned to Ramana the next day, Ramana looked at her with compassion, expressing his gratitude and saying that he had been filled with that gesture. Our sages in this country have always been extraordinarily liberal. If you see the relationship that Ramakrishna Paramahansa had with Girish, you would feel the same intimacy, the same love, and the same compassion. Shirdi Baba, the same. So, my closing thought. Sometime in 2007, life's challenges increased. And I decided that the only way that I could resolve it in some meaningful way was to seek the guidance of a living master. So my last trip to Arunachala was a Girivalam, where with tears in my eyes, I appealed to Lord Shiva to send me a guru. The Lord answered that prayer in 2 months. And in July 28th, 2007, I met my guru, Sadhguru Sri Sharvana Baba. He was tender age of 27. I was probably about double his age. and I never looked back since. I was also, just so that you know, very keen. By that time, I had delved into our scriptures. I had gone through them in a pretty exhaustive way. I had navigated the Upanishads, the Gita, the epics, the Puranas, and also the other 9 major wisdom traditions of the world. So when I took this resolve, my late father had imbued a deep love for Shirdi Baba in my childhood, which has never left me. And in the sacred Sai Charita, Sai Sat Charita, the Charita describes 8 kinds of gurus. The guru who teaches you mathematics is called a Shiksha Guru because he teaches you mathematics, Shiksha. The guru who gives you spiritual initiation is a Diksha Guru, who gives you Diksha. But the highest, the 8th kind, is a Parama Guru or a Satguru or a Satya Guru. And I was very clear in my mind at that time, in 1999, 2000, that I wanted only a Parama Guru. And I thirsted for one. By God's grace, I was able to find one. And the love that my Guru shows, he took me under his wing with no hesitation. And today, everything I am, I owe to him. No amount of work, no amount of seva, no amount of service that I can do can ever help me repay that debt. I think it's a great privilege, the greatest privilege that one can have in this universe, in this life, in this worldly life, is to come under the grace of a living master. A master who can take ownership and responsibility for not only your worldly life, but your transcendental life, your spiritual life, because that is what matters in the end. How much of your life have you given to others in the service of others? The Lord was a humble carpenter, and he drew his apostles from ordinary men by telling them that I will make you fishers of men. And that is what gurus do, Parama Gurus do. They pull you like a magnet when you're ready. And you must have subtlety of mind and suppleness of intellect to hear that call, to see that call, to recognize that call. And if you're able to do that, there is no reason why any of us must turn back. Thank you very much, gentlemen, ladies, for your kind attention and your kindness and generosity in inviting me to address you on the subject of one of the most celebrated sages that modern India has produced. Om Sri Ramanaya Namaha.
Thanks a lot, dear Professor Ramnath Narayanswamy, for giving us this beautiful talk on Ramana Maharshi. We are greatly enriched by this great person, a great intellect, yet still a childlike person. From your talk, we understand that from your childhood days, you were in search of Ramana Maharshi. And you passionately followed him, this silent sage, and you wrote about him, and searching the life of Christ moved you. So also, the life of Christ is a message of unconditional love and forgiveness. Certainly had a great impact on you, and you saw the significance of Christ's crucifixion in his merging with the infinite. Swami Vivekananda is a whose message, a blessing on religion, first of all, that something remarkable one to say, as he followed Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa and giving us the importance of religion, its preciousness. You brought it out in your talk, something very striking, dear Professor. So, God is only one form that you explained to us, and the responses are many. And the sacred scriptures of our country are something beautiful, remarkable, deep, with the deepest knowledge that inspired over the years for centuries together so many people. And these pointed towards the transcendence. You said that our religion helps us to understand the transcendent one, our God, and our life is a journey towards that transcendent God. And your great devotion to Arunachala, the Shiva itself, something telling us that you are so close to God, and by your life itself, dear Professor, we see that your commitment, your determination towards your journey towards the transcendent one. So, the great Ramana Maharshi's life of Jnana, Bhakti, Karma Marga, Yoga Marga, you are explaining to us, and brought to your mind the life of and the teaching of Saint Teresa of Avila and Saint Catherine is something beautiful one. And realization of the realization of perfection, that we are made for God. That means our realization comes and it completes when we attain God. The Brahman you are telling us, and our mind is a bundle of memories, said, and by that we have to use our intellect. By the power of that intellect, we are able to master over the temptations and the struggles of life, and thus we have to be merged with the Atman, the Paramatman. Nanu Yaru, who am I? You are asking a question that we need to ask. Everyone has to ask this question: who am I? And this is the Brahmastra you said to attain the Paramatma. And also the reading of the life of saints and sages does go beyond the scripture and become mystic. Is something remarkable, a message which should be hallmark of our devotion today in our relationship with one another, with the whole humanity, hallmark of our relationship with the humanity. Thank you, dear Professor, that you, in your talk, you are so radiant like the light from the sun to us. We can see in you that radiance, that the light that's coming from the transcendent in your talk. And so the one question you were asking us that, and one message that you gave us is that life is a privilege, a gift of God, you said. Life is a privilege, a gift of it, certainly a gift of God. Life comes from God alone, and that's a great gift. And therefore, we need to follow in our lives a guru, a Parama Guru, our God, as you are speaking about it. So Lord Arunachala, or Shiva, so also our God is the one ultimately who gives us and rewards us for our pure and good life. Thank you very much, dear Professor Ramnath Narayanswamy. So our audience are waiting for you to ask you questions. Sure. Over to our audience, that kindly ask your questions or any clarification from our professor. He is able to give you beautiful answers. Anyone to put your questions on the
Father Gabriel, some of them have put it on the chat.
Yeah, Father, could you follow that? Father, could you follow that? Because they
Okay,
are not
okay.
coming on my screen. Yeah.
Okay. I can. Yeah. Yes. There is from Rama Narayanswamy is asking a question about thought of. Can you talk a bit on your thought of Samadhi? So the question is about a little more explanation about Samadhi, but there were also a few other observations and comments. Shobha Sagaram wrote, mesmerizing talk. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge of a great saint. Shanda has observed, kept us spellbound by the talk and enriched our thoughts on religion, whichever is followed by one's heart. Minimal, very insightful talk. Delia Maria, Prabhuji, you are a beautiful soul. May you find liberation. And someone has written, beautiful to take away, spirituality has no religion, the vastness of in simplicity. So maybe, Professor, the question is,
Let me respond. I think I have understood it.
yes, sir.
There are three thoughts maybe that I could share with you. The first on religion and spirituality. Mother Amritanandmayi, another great guru of Kerala and the world, of course. I've met Amma many times and I love her intensely. She once said, religion is the outer shell of the coconut. Some people say it's red, some people say it's brown, some people say it's black, whereas spirituality is the sweet nectar that is contained inside. So I think that's a very beautiful distinction. Religion can be potentially divisive, especially when you are tempted to go to another person belonging to another faith and you say, mine is better than yours. The moment you do that, you show that you have no knowledge of religion at all, that the teaching of religion has been a waste of time on you. Religion ought to make you open, inclusive. So to do that, you need to dip into spirituality. Spirituality has no boundaries. There are no barriers. Ethnicity, sex, nationality, region, nothing matters. Because in God's court, it is open to all. Not to some, not to a few, but to all. So that's the first thought. The second thought is about Samadhi. Samadhi has, of course, many meanings and many explanations. But fundamentally, it is a state of gnosis, which is very familiar. The Christian tradition is replete with instances of this, as much as our traditions. You see, Ramana gave us two clues. In my lectures, I teach a course on spirituality. I've been doing that for many years. Father Matthew used to come and address 2 sessions in the course on the message of Jesus. I was often asked this question, can you give us a clue of self-realization? What does it mean? And I would always take recourse to Sri Ramana's explanations. He said 2 things, and I'm going to repeat that to you. It's remarkable, the answer that he gave. He said, first, just as it is impossible for an ordinary human being to do without thought, if you try to keep your mind blank for a few seconds, you'll find it very difficult to do. A self-realized master finds it as difficult to entertain a thought. Can you imagine that? It is such an exalted state. I'll repeat that. Just as it is difficult for an ordinary person to do without thought, a self-realized person, a Mahatma, finds it difficult to have a thought. It's an extraordinary state. It is an extraordinary state of exaltation. Second, and if you read Amma's writings, you will see that as well. She says, for a self-realized master, when you come in front of him or her, it is difficult for them to see you as somebody different from them. It's again an extraordinary insight. It means that for a Mahatma, there is no other. There is no object. There is only subject. So the ordinary human experience is that we, Ramnath or Father Matthew, as individuals, we exist in an objective world. For a self-realized master, it is just the opposite. The world exists inside them. So it's an extraordinary state. It is a state where the subject disappears. So for a Mahatma, the entire universe is him. All is him. All is her. So it's not an easy state to understand. It is not an easy state to describe in words, because it is a state which is fundamentally beyond the mind. So the only tool that you have to discover it, to experience, is to experience it. And the only way you can experience it is through faith, which is why prayer, sadhana, spiritual practice is absolutely critical. I hope I have responded to both the questions.
Professor Ramnath, we are together. I think we made the Girivalam, and
Yes.
also you took me to the monastery where he was living, and showed me the beauty, the power of Ramana Maharshi's silence and his smile. And I am grateful. You did not tell me that what you are going to do with me, but we go. And I simply followed. And then the midnight, 8 o'clock we started, 8 in the evening, and then we completed by 12:30. The Girivalam was something very fascinating, and how almost 5 lakhs of people in a full moon day making around 15 kilometers of walk. And I remember, and then you opened to me this great saint, and I still remember when I was a seminarian, there was again another Maitrananda Swamiji from the Ramakrishna mission. He told me that I went and stayed in the Ramakrishna mission in Kerala, in Purnatagara. He told me he had lots of questions. So he went to Arunachala, met Ramana Maharshi, and as he was simply sitting in front of him, looking at him, and his smile and the silence, all of those questions were simply vanished. So I remember those. And then I have, as many other times I also went, collected the books. But I also see that at the end of Ramana Maharshi's life, he had cancer on his backside, it seems. And then the doctors were there to operate, and he didn't allow them to have anesthesia. And simply as they operated. So could you just say about, as a Maharshi, a person who is transcending the pain and the suffering, he was capable of doing this suffering by himself while the doctors are simply operating on him.
It is true that he refused all help. And one medical opinion actually went to him and said that they will have to surgically amputate his arm. He flatly refused. Then he was also asked whether he experiences pain. And he once said, the pain is like the sting of 1,000 scorpions. And yet he said, it is like pain in a dream. Remember that this Mahatma had no body consciousness at all. And we as human beings, we identify very strongly with our bodies. And we project this identification to others. He would always say, move out of it. So he would always say, body consciousness is not real consciousness. To experience real consciousness, you have to come out of the body. The body is not you. You have a body, but it's not you. You have an ego, but the ego is not you. You have a mind, but the mind is not you. You are something infinitely above that. Discover that. Any other questions? Be happy to answer.
Professor Narayanswamy,
Yes, sir.
one little question I would like to ask. When I read out all your qualifications and so many experiences, especially in the field of political science and economy all over the world, and you are experiencing and analyzing so many economies, how this your deep spiritual experience impacted upon you while analyzing these economies where they were in often they are in contradiction to one another, having socialistic, capitalistic situation, people's situation, where the struggles between the peoples. What would you like to say about that, sir?
It's very important, as Ramana would often emphasize, because he used to be asked these kinds of questions. He used to say that worldly existence and spiritual existence are not antithetical to each other. They can complement each other. And the way that they can complement each other is you must perform. Let me answer this question with an answer that Ramakrishna gave a devotee. Ramakrishna once was asked, how do you live in this world? And he gave a very beautiful answer, Father. He said, you should learn to live like a lotus. If you see a lotus, it survives on the dirtiest of water. It survives on grime, slime. And yet when you come near it, it emits a divine fragrance. And you will see that never at any point of time does it ever allow the water to touch it. So he said, your one leg should be in the world. Your other leg should be on God. So you should not allow the water is the dirt of the world. You should not allow it to corrupt you. You should not allow it to influence you. And to do that, you must be firmly anchored on Dharma and Satya. So in a sense, so the devotee still didn't understand. And then Ramakrishna said, have you been to a bank? He said, yes. Have you seen the cashier handle lakhs and lakhs of rupees? He said, even when the cashier handles that amount of money, never at any point of time does the cashier ever think, this is mine. So to live successfully in the world, you need to eschew I and mine. And to do that is not easy if you are being brought up to worship it. And that, I think, is the whole beginning of spiritual practice. To humble oneself, to go on bended knees. Once we were in Tirupati with my Guruji. And as you know, it takes hours to go in, get a chance to glimpse of the deity. We started at 8:30 in the morning and we reached the inner sanctum only at 6:30 in the evening. After a couple of hours in the queue, I got irritated. And I voiced my irritation openly to my Guru. And I told him, why didn't we take the privileged path? There was something called a VIP pass. So I said, why did we not take that? Why are we waiting for so long? My Guruji turned to me very kindly and he said, with a lot of love in his voice, he said, Professor Swami, when you come to God, you must come to God like this, with patience and devotion in your heart. You must not go with expectation. You must not go with this desire that I must see him first. No. You must await his pleasure. That was a very deep, profound lesson that he taught me that day. That when you come to God, you must abandon all support, all ego, all sense of self-importance, and surrender to him only. When you do that, you will see him. If you are not able to do that, the longer it will take.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Wonderful. Wonderful.
I think that Father Gabriel, there is no other questions.
I have a question, I think.
Could I ask, I put it on the chat,
Yes,
but I can repeat.
yes,
No
Cheryl,
problem.
yes.
I really want to thank you, Professor, because I think what you shared with us is a glimpse of an abyss. So you can make out the depth within, which is cannot be exhausted in a lesson like this. So thank you also for that, because every word came through your experience, and that's that. If I had to ask you briefly a few main points of Sri Ramana's teachings, because you mentioned through your experiences different aspects that came about, but what would he concentrate on? Because you also spoke about this very important question, who am I? So as a guru, how did he guide his followers? How did he guide you all towards this transcendence that this is what our life should be like, or towards this question, who am I? What was his path like?
Ma'am, I can give you a short answer. I can give you a long, complicated answer. So I prefer a short answer. The short answer is he called his method self-enquiry. Inquire into the self. And I would recommend that you read a couple of works that are available in the ashram, especially a book by David Godman called The Essential Teachings of Ramana Maharshi. It's published by Penguins, which has an exhaustive account of all kinds of questions that devotees would ask him, and he patiently answers them. There are also a couple of other books in the ashram, which are available in the ashram, which you can read. The most famous of which is a 2-volume work called Talks, which is written by Sri Mungala Venkatramaya, which is a Bible of Ramana devotees. It's a day-by-day account of life in the ashram and the way the Maharishi used to respond to questions that were posed to him. Please get hold of these 2 books. I think they will enrich you in your journey to understanding the teachings of the sage. There are lots of other books that I can recommend, but these 2, and probably Paul Brunton's Search and Secret India, will do a lot of good. These are inspirational works, they are transformative works, and reading them has the power to change your life.
Anyone else, friends? Shall we come to close of our session? Dear Professor Ramnath Narayanswamy, we are privileged, sir. We are enriched today. This evening became a joyful one for us. We are filled with grace by your deep wisdom, your experience of God, something beautiful. A person who loves God, a person filled with goodness, which is able to give to others, share with others. That's the way you fill in our hearts such a peace, such goodness, that we are able to share with one another. We thank you for all your goodness, dear Professor. We wish you all good. May God bless every work of yours, your contribution to the humanity. You're the gift to the humanity, looking at your experience all over the world, for the whole humanity of the world you served. May God bless you abundantly. Thank you very much. Over to Father Chandrakunal.
Yes. Professor Ramnath Narayanswamy, it was a stunning, stimulating, mesmerizing, and moving accord of Ramana Maharshi as well as your own personal pursuit of spirituality. And it has really touched our hearts as well as our heads And I am absolutely sure that it will move our hands to cross over, understand, to transcend, and to find the Parama Guru. So, sir, in the name of all gathered here, and we are actually lucky to have you today, and it was a very splendid lecture and appreciate, and I am sure that many will be eagerly awaiting through looking through other books to know more about um, uh, Ramana Maharshi. So thank you very much, and taking your so much of your time in preparing, and absolutely we have taken by your mesmerizing talk. And also to Father Gabriel Lobo. Father is the regional secretary of Ecumenism and Interfaith Dialogue. So therefore, thanking you for coming today and also moderating the session in a very splendid way. Thank you, Father, and I'm looking forward that we will have more of such interactions as you are the powerful secretary of the regional bishops conference, the Catholic Bishops Conference of India, and also to everyone, Minlun, who was introduced the Father, and then to each and everyone, I thank you for your patient listening. And the question for those who are taking this as a certificate course, how the mystical spirituality of Ramana Maharshi radiated through his silence and smile, and what would be the takeaway from today's lecture. So I will write it on the WhatsApp as well as in our group. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
And
Father.
it was a great.
Thank you very much, Father Chandrakunal. Give me the opportunity to moderate this session. God bless you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Father. Thank you very much, Father.
Thank you.
And good night.
Good night.
Good night, Father.
Thank you, sir. Thank